question. But first of all, Tom, thank you very much for this opportunity for us to talk a little bit, especially given that we have now your incoming event in August in Brazil. It's the first time we are talking here in a direct interview with you. I have been sometimes with the common chat, the fireside chat, but it's the first time we had this opportunity to talk. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. I'm glad to be here, Mario. It's good. We need to do this more often, so your Brazilian audience gets some more of this kind of thing. So maybe this will just be the beginning of a series.
Okay. It's gonna be very good. Okay, and then I believe it will give more chance for the people here to have some idea or some better idea of my big toe and how this can be useful to everyone. And I believe there is a lot of usefulness in it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this at all. I'm doing it really by heart now. I believe it's very interesting. This has been an adventure for me since the beginning when you authorized me to translate the books, and I'm quite honored that you let me do that, and thank you very much for it. So my first question to you would be, if you had just a few minutes to tell someone that doesn't know anything about my big toe and what's in it, what it's all about, what would you say to them?
Well, that's quite a challenge, Mario. My big toe is a very large undertaking. It's deep and it's broad, and it takes usually like 3 days for me to explain it, to people in a workshop. But I'm going to try in a few minutes to what it's all about, a summary. And that is the my big toe, the toe part, TOE, is a theory of everything. It's a science term that means an overarching understanding of the nature of reality and how the world works. Physicists, since Einstein, have been working on a toe, a theory of everything. But from their viewpoint, a theory of everything is just something that would bring both quantum mechanics and relativity together, one overarching understanding of science that would explain both quantum mechanics and relativity, because quantum mechanics and relativity each have an assumption that is invalid in the other. So they are, what that tells us is that neither one is the fundamental, the biggest picture. There's some other bigger picture of which they're both a piece. That's what Einstein and the rest of the physicists knew back in the early 1900s. So they were searching for that bigger piece. And what I have done is found that bigger piece, and it turns out that that bigger piece is consciousness. Consciousness is what is fundamental. And I have been able to derive physics from that consciousness, so that from the understanding of consciousness, you can explain both quantum mechanics and relativity very clearly, such that they are not weird science anymore. They're just normal, logical science. You see, quantum mechanics is called weird science by the quantum mechanic theorists because it does things that kind of fly in the face of a material, objective reality. Things happen in quantum mechanics that are just impossible to happen. So it's called weird science. It's not really weird. It's just a matter of perspective. When you see quantum mechanics from the right perspective, it's a logical science. You don't have to just compute the answer. You can look at the answer and see the logic of it. And the same with relativity. Relativity has this underlying fact that the velocity of light is a constant. It doesn't matter how fast the source of the light is moving. The light always moves at the same speed. And again, my consciousness theory explains exactly why that is and how it couldn't be any other way. So this is that overarching thing. But besides that, it also tells you about some other things that go on in our life. It tells you some things in the subjective world as well. So this overarching science that explains quantum mechanics and relativity also explains many of the things that we now call paranormal. And the only reason we call them paranormal, that means beyond normal, outside of normal, is because we just don't understand yet how and why they work. Well, we didn't understand a lot of the things we understand now in physics. We didn't understand how and why they worked, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but we've learned. Well, this bigger theory that has consciousness at its center explains things like using your mind to heal, being able to extract data from databases about various things, how it is that you can affect reality with your thoughts and with your mind, such as the placebo effect. All of these things fall in as logical attributes of consciousness. They just now have scientific explanations. So what I would say in a few minutes, I guess I've already gone past a few minutes, but what I would say in a few minutes is that the My Big Toe is a theory of consciousness that builds a scientific foundation under subjective as well as objective reality. You see, we have two different realities here, the subjective and the objective. Science, physics, biology, chemistry, they want to stick just to the objective. And anything outside the objective, they don't really see as science. So those are called the hard sciences. Then there are the soft sciences that deal with subjective reality, such as sociology, psychology, anthropology. All of these deal, even medicine is one of those. Medicine is a large part of that, is also a soft science. Anyway, the soft sciences deal with subjective reality by using statistics. You see, if somebody has a new pill for getting rid of headaches, okay, you can't just give this pill to somebody and if their headache goes away, say, "Oh, my pill works." It may not work because the headache may just have gone away anyway. Mm-hmm. So what you have to do is give 1,000 people this pill and see how, 1,000 people with headaches, and see how many of them get rid of their headaches right afterwards. And that then will generate some efficacy of, that your pill is able to get rid of headaches. So in subjective science, you can do subjective science. You just have to do it with statistics and probability. It's not just a one-off situation. You have to look at situations in a larger context of the whole. Okay, so this My Big Toe theory, it builds science, logical science, under subjective subjective ideas, subjective experiences, and it also defines the objective world as well. And as it turns out, the objective world is just a subset of the bigger world. There really is no objective world. Our objective world is only what should we say, almost objective, but it's never 100% objective. There's always uncertainty in that world. There's always some part of it that is unknown. So it only approximates being objective. Well, anyway, that's what it is. It's this overall science that explains things like the paranormal, things like psychology and sociology and how those things work, how the mind works and the things that the mind can do, because it's a theory of consciousness, and it explains hard science as well. So that's it in a nutshell. It's that overall, overarching theory that gives a logical scientific explanation for all of reality. Well, so far, I'm looking for exceptions. I'm looking very hard for things that don't fit this theory, things that this theory cannot explain. And I've been looking for them now for about 15 years. And I found a few, but as soon as I think about it and studied a bit, it is able to explain those things, like chaos. I looked at the chaos theory, and sure enough, my theory, beginning with consciousness, will give a fundamental description of why chaos theory works the way it does. It gives what's really going on under the hood. Why does chaos act that way? And so there's a few things like that I've thought that, well, I can't explain that yet, but with a little thought, I'm able to explain it. So I haven't found anything yet that this doesn't explain. Doesn't mean there aren't things out there, because a theory is never really done. It's not like I have a theory and, it does everything. You'd have to be arrogant to believe that. I have a theory that explains, gives a good logical explanation to all the information that I have now. But information that we have now is going to be small piece of the information we're going to have 100 years from now. So theories have to grow with experience and with new facts as they come in. So far, it seems to work for what's known both in the world of science and in the world of, say, metaphysics, philosophy, epistemology, ontology. Those are all sciences called metaphysics. And it answers the deep questions there. Even in theology, it answers the deep questions there too. So in all the fields, it seems to work equally well. And I only say that not because I'm so enamored with the theory, but because that's just the facts. Looking at the data points. What are the things we know about this reality? And how well does this describe them? And does it describe them with very few assumptions and just logic? And there's only two assumptions in the whole theory. And those are very simple, straightforward assumptions. They're not particularly wild assumptions. So that's what it's all about in a nutshell. But I'm afraid I've gone way over my several minutes.
Okay. People used to say that you should be prepared to explain the elevator what it is all about, okay? And you have to have a speech that is ready for it. So it's very hard in this case, I know.
Yeah.
But it's okay. And I would just add, if it's not clear, that it also helps to explain a lot about you, because everything is about you in some way, because you are in the center of what you are interacting, and then everything is kind of not objective because you are always in the middle of it. And then your books also helps a lot about the understanding of oneself, okay? About the ego, the fears, and the
yes,
the traps of the word is missing now, but doesn't mind, the belief traps. There is a lot of thing about, especially in the book 2, and then it's really about everything. And most of all, just to complete it, is that it really gives you a simple way for reasoning. Anyone can use the reasoning of my big toe to find answers for things, using the same kind of reasoning. It's impressive. I was, what would, if I use the my big toe reasoning system, how would I explain this? And then you can really find some answers. It's really impressive.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. I make it sound like it's all about science and physics and that sort of thing, but it's also about individuals, people, their lives, their choices. It's about, how do you find happiness? How do you find joy in your life? How do you deal with the stress and problems? What's the difference between right and wrong when you make your choices? How do you know whether a choice is a good choice or a bad choice? And things like, what is our purpose here? Why are we here? What's the point of being here in this life at this time? What are we supposed to be doing here? What's the point of that? It answers that. So it's got this dimension to it, which is the subjective dimension that talks about people and their minds, their choices, their decisions, and builds a scientific understanding about those sorts of things. It's probably the only theory I know of that has a technical definition for love.
For sure.
Love is it's the nature of a low entropy consciousness. And though that sounds kind of technical, but that's really what love is. So it talks about all those areas. It's about people and their choices. People, if people are living a life of struggle, they're living a life of seeming to just never get to where they want to go. They just always have these problems, these barriers, these things that they could get by. And they think, if I could just get past this barrier, everything would be great after that. But it is only great after that for a very short time. And then there's another barrier. And if I could just get past that barrier, everything would be great. And it happens over and over again. There's always this next barrier, and it gets frustrating. And people, have a lot of anxiety. They don't seem to be able to make a lot of progress. Life is difficult, and they find themselves in a constant struggle, constant suffering, constant, irritation and annoyance with the rest of the world, with other people, with their relationships, with their boss, with their jobs, with politics, with everything. And if you understand this theory, you can let all that go. You can live a life of joy that is optimized for your productivity, gives you a lot of freedom of mind, and lets things, lets you evolve into another whole perspective about life that is a joyful perspective, not a struggle.
It's not working in a coal mine, as you said.
Yes.
Not
yes.
about, evolution is not about working in a coal mine. That's a very good expression I found in it.
Yes. And the book is meant to be available and accessible by the average reader. It's not like you need to be a scientist to read this book, though it is a book about science that explains everything else. It's written in terms that everybody can understand it, and particularly the left brainers, the people who want logical process. They want logic. They want rationality. It's particularly good for them because it is a logical process, just like mathematics is a logical process. You start at the beginning with a few axioms, and then you develop everything else from that. And that's the way this is, but it's a very accessible book. It's a big book, though. It can be intimidating. It's, like 850 pages, I guess, in its current volume. The very first one, I think, was more like 900 pages, but it got condensed with a little smaller font and something somewhere along the way. But anyway, it's about 850 pages, which is a lot of pages, but you just need to read it slowly. Just a couple of pages a day is enough. To sit down and read the whole thing in 2 or 3 weeks is to miss about 90% of it.
It's not going to do you much good. Okay, you are not going to extract the most of it. You are right, but I'm quite suspect because I love it. But I love the humor that is there, and that helps to refresh it a lot. But anyway, if it can be translated, I believe it can be read too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I tried to put humor in it because it's so intense. The book is very dense. It has a lot of information in it. You get more new ideas in a paragraph than you generally get out of most books altogether. It is hard to deal with all of that if you try to read it too quickly. The humor is there just to keep people's heads from exploding. If that intensity, stayed there all the time, people wouldn't be able to get through it. They'd just have to put it down because it would just be overwhelming. So I put a lot of jokes and humor all the way through it, just to make it a little easier on the reader to get through it.
And it helps a lot. Okay, I consider it done. Could be shorter, but I consider it done.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. I've never been to Brazil, and I'm looking forward very much to coming and experiencing Brazil. And Brazil is a country that has always had a very deep undercurrent of understanding that the world is more than just a physical place. It's one of those countries that has always had that in its roots, and its indigenous people well understood that sort of thing, and it's seeped over into those who came from other places. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to the meeting. We're going to spend a couple of days talking to each other. I'll have some presentations of how all this works. What you've just seen now is a quick jump over the top, but I'll be talking in a lot more detail about how all of this works, and more about how you can apply it to your life to make your life better. We'll talk quite a bit about application as well as theory. And I'll give plenty of time for Q&A so people can ask their questions, because it's, again, if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So your questions are important, probably more important than me lecturing and giving you information. It's more important that you have your questions, because a person can just be blocked by some idea. They just can't get it because of this. And if you just address that block so that they can see right through it, then they can go on their way again until they hit to the next block. And then they need to ask another question. So getting these questions answered, I think, is a very important part of the process. And I'd like for us to leave as much time as possible to let people ask those questions. And we can even do a little bit of experiential stuff, if you like, where, I talk about how to heal or remote view or do other things like that. And we can do a little bit of that as well, if people would like to do that. So
I really believe people would really love it if we can place something in among
sure. I think people would like that too. So if you want to know how to
that would be great.
CRs and remote view and heal people, well, we'll do that probably somewhere toward the end, and we'll just give people some instructions and give them some practice and give them some opportunities. And that is always fun, because again, if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So I feel obligated to help people learn how to make it their experience. If you do these things and you experience it, that you can heal somebody with your mind, then that makes all the difference. That'll take it maybe from a 10% possible to maybe a 90% possible when you do it yourself. So it's important to have ways of doing these things, but we'll do pretty much whatever the audience wants to do. I'm very flexible, and we can kind of make it up as we go and serve the audience the best way that we know how. But the more people we have, the more fun it will be, in the sense that the questions will be more varied and richer. And one of the neat things about this is that you will find, when you come to this event of mine, that you'll be surrounded by a lot of other people who are like-minded. Many of us who get into a spiritual path, it's a very lonely path, because you can't talk to other people about it, particularly if that path has something to do with the paranormal, which is almost a taboo subject. You talk about the paranormal and some people call you, that you're dizzy and it's all woo-woo, and they think you have a weak mind. So when you know these things are real because you've experienced them, but you can't talk to anybody about them because our culture doesn't support it, although the Brazilian culture probably does support it more than most, it's nice to come to an event where there's, a lot of people who are struggling to understand the same things you are, and you interact with those people. And that's a very big part of it that people don't realize. The interaction that gets going on in the group, the energy that we build as a group, will really be a valuable experience to have, as opposed to, say, watching it on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube later, but you miss the dynamic of being there and being a part of the energy we create in this group. So it's really a good thing to experience, firsthand. You get a lot more out of it than if you just saw it as a movie. That makes a big difference. So I'm looking forward to going to Brazil. Going to see a little bit of Brazil afterwards, I hope, and it's going to be fun. We're going to have a really good time. So hopefully everybody will get their questions answered, and they'll see the logic of it. I'm not going to have 3 or 4 days, but I'll have enough that I can lay out most of the logic of it, and the rest of the logic will come out with people's questions as they say things. So it's going to be a good time. Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of new people. I'm sorry that it all has to be in English, but that's the only language I speak. So we're going to have translators there, and the translators will give real-time Brazilian Portuguese. As I speak, there'll be a translator talking to you in a headset that will let you know what it is I'm saying. And as you ask questions, that translator will let me know what you're saying. So the language won't be a barrier. So come on, and let's have a really good time together, having this conversation about my big toe and your big toe, because my big toe is just a place to start your own big toe. That's the key. The point here is that you have to develop your own big toe. You have to get there in your own way, on your own path. You can't follow my path. You have to find your own path. And that's the process of creating your own big toe through your own understanding and your own experience. And that's really what I do. I help other people develop their own big toes, to figure out their own life in their own way from their own experience. I don't want to tell people, here's something you should believe. That's just laying on another layer of belief that is just not helpful at all. That's not what it's about. It's about you learning to understand your world and find a bigger picture of that world, and one that has more sources of information. So I'm looking forward to seeing Brazil and having some fun and meeting a lot of great people there.